We are creating this device for putting a dog collar to translate their vocalizations. But we are building a den, which is a modern version of a crate. So that's mostly for health purposes, but it'll also help us determine behavioral traits.
Thank you for being on the podcast. I know we've known each other for a while now, and I've been following like your startup and everything. And I just wanted to have you on just because, I think you're working on something that's near and dear to my heart. Like I have a dog right behind me. There you go. But I guess maybe for like the listeners out there, we primarily go after like, I would say startups, tech founders, entrepreneurs, like makers that listen to the podcast. But like maybe at a high level, at just like, you could kind of go into detail, like what you're doing, how you got into it, and then we could kind of take it from there.
I've been working on startups for the last, 15, 16 years now. But the one that we're talking about today is called Sarama. And so I got into this a few years ago to understand if animal communication was possible. And so I started with dolphin communication, which with like a nonprofit open source community out in Seattle. And so that was like the start. And ultimately we got to the point where we are today. We are creating this device to basically, this is open. I'm printing the new enclosure for putting a dog collar to translate their vocalizations. And so initially the big thing is health and behavior. That's what a lot of our initial customers really, really care about. But there's a cohort of people that's working to build a new language that works between dogs communicating to us, because they have a special part of their brain that understands our language, but we don't have that same level of understanding of their vocalizations.
Got it. Okay, so you're working on like probably one of the more important things out there. Like if you look at Star Trek, they used to have like the translators. You're basically creating like a futuristic translator that will help different species like communicate better, right? So like I kind of view it as like almost like the future of humanity, where like it's hard enough for humans to communicate with other humans, let alone like it's hard for us to like communicate with other like animals in our life. Like why dogs first? Like why pick dogs as like this like venture?
Yeah, so the common thing is, and you're hearing more and more about this, where people talk about communication with interspecies communication. It has to be a more serious endeavor. So dolphins are the primary model of development. And so Google released something called Dolphin Gemma, which is taking 40 years of Atlantic wild dolphin, spotted dolphin data from Professor Hertzing, Dr. Hertzing, and she has a TED talk about this. And Anthropic's co-founder talks about dolphin communication. Reid Hoffman talks about dolphin communication, or chimpanzee or primate communication. The challenge with all of those is how do you ground truth it? And even with us, it's like, how do you ground truth communication with a dog? Well, there's one benefit with dogs. They listen to us very, very carefully, and we can work with them to shape language. We can work with them to shape behavior, but also dogs in many ways are highly communicative. And so sometimes they get exhausted if you don't give them what they want, and they've been asking for a while. So that's called learned helplessness, and that's a form of training that you can do to like get them to stop doing something. But there's also another one which is more productive. Like they ask you for something, you give it to them. And that's something where we're seeing that with the dogs pressing buttons. We're seeing that with the dogs that have historically rung the bell, where, that's usually very simple, like they ring a bell, they go outside, or they ring a bell, they get water. But now they're using buttons and they're getting very advanced. But the question is, can vocalization expand that repertoire greater than just the sense of what's on the ground with what they think they can communicate, and we can get that. Now, the question is, do they have the cognitive ability? They do have the cognitive ability. That's been shown in a number of recent research papers. But more importantly, the question is, what will they communicate? And that comes down to how you facilitate that communication rather than the preconceived cognitive abilities.
Got it. So you're saying that dogs are extremely smart, and I'd say humans are not catching a lot of their nuances a lot of the time, but you're building a way for humans to catch a lot of those nuances. And like for me, I'll just talk about my experience. I have two dogs, and I didn't understand their language at all, and it took me years to really understand, like when two dogs are playing and they're sneezing at each other, that means this is play. Like that's a like common dog communication. I didn't know that. Your device will like give everyone in the world way more insight into all these little tiny tells of like communication. But I guess the question for you is like, the sneeze is common across dogs, supposedly. Like they sneeze when they're play fighting, and that just tells each other, hey, this is play. Are there a lot of those traits, or is it like they learn to communicate, I guess, like more just with their owner?
Oh, yeah. So the way that vocal communication generally works is it's usually very learned behavior. So what'll happen is in your area, you'll look at small like puppies and how they adapt and work with larger dogs, and you'll notice that puppies don't actually use the sneeze technique as much, or they do, but they don't know how to use it all the time, and it's very different. And sometimes you'll see a larger or more older dog snap at a puppy that's just annoying them or not picking up signals or not doing something right. And sometimes that freaks people out. They go, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like my dog doesn't usually act this way." But that's because your dog is usually not around rambunctious puppies. And so the question isn't so much like what's universal, it's just what's regionally available for those dogs. Now, sneezes generally seems to be pretty universal around the world, but I don't know if it with wild dogs or dingoes if it also applies, but I've seen it with domesticated and home dogs. Now, other thing we found is that dogs that are closer to wolves genetically will howl more, and the ones further away will bark more. And a lot of that bark vocalization behavior is for the benefit of people. And a lot of the communication that dogs have with each other is very much body language or odor based. So they will, have the play bow to show that, they're about to play. Or you'll see, like, if a new dog enters a park, and some dogs will just stiffen, get very, like, low, and then look to see if the dog is interested in playing or not. And then they'll just sprint towards the other dog. Now, with smaller dogs, it's like pretty reasonable. When you have a German Shepherd, it is scary, so people get freaked out. But a lot of this is like very much body language. The vocalization, they found that dogs vocalize a lot more when there's people around than when there's not people around. And besides like sneezes and sometimes like whimpers, they don't really vocalize a lot with each other or snaps. But so it does seem meaningful that the vocalization's a lot for our benefit. A lot of it is like historically it was about alerting us that there was a danger approaching, or letting us know that they've found something, or to call attention to themselves or to something that they're concerned about. And then iteratively, it's gotten to a point where they'll communicate emotional states, they'll communicate health states. Like if, very obvious one is my dog was just very sick recently. She had a foxtail in her paw, and it was a lot of like panting, heavy breathing, whimpering, and it clearly was just a lot of pain. Now, in the wild, you wouldn't want to expose your position if you were like a wild animal, but dogs have never been wild animals. They've always been domesticated. That's why they're caninus familiaris, right? Like they're a distinct breed. And so this view that like, do dogs have survival skills? It's no for the most part, because they've mostly grown in human environments. Now there are wild dogs, and there's like breeds of dogs that have never been domesticated as well, but like that's a whole separate. Majority of them are within human environments.
Interesting. So they communicate with like voice. I also heard some crazy. I don't know if this is true or not, but there's also like their eyebrows are like they learned, or like over time, like that was a trait that was like bred in them, but they have like way more enhanced eyebrows than like a wolf and those sorts of things. So I think, are you looking at that sort of stuff, or is it all vocal and like movement, like with what you're building?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So tail wagging, eyebrows, facial expressions, wide eyes, being able to, the puppy dog is like a very distinctive thing that people emulate to get things that they want. And yeah, so there's a lot of these are genetically evolved physical features, but they're also ways that they communicate with us. Simultaneously, there's part of a dog's brain that understands finger pointing from humans, eye gaze, tone of voice. So they're very tonally sensitive. If you say the same word in multiple tones, their reactions are different. And people thought, well, it's because like dogs, like they understand our emotion, which is true. But the bigger thing is that dogs have adapted to the tone of human voice. So an angry or hushed tone will get a different response. So an example, my wife and my in-laws were actually in a accidentally caught in a SWAT raid. So there was a person above them in an apartment, and he was wanted for armed robbery, and the SWAT team was coming to get him. And so everybody went from like laughing, and it was helpful. And then when they went to leave, the cops told them to stay inside. So they all got hushed tones, and they all, stayed very low. And that was the first time she was telling me that Kai was actually very quiet. She was very reserved. She didn't move around. She was very sensitive to any sounds that were being made. And so it's very clear that they can adapt very fast to the way that we change our tone and the way that we change our emotions as well. So dogs can smell and hear they can smell our hormones and hear our nervous system. And so there's so much that they can actually understand about being around people all the time. And so to your point, they're very expressive, and a lot of that expression is very, very much towards us. Now, the collar that we've built is mostly on vocalization, but we are building a den, which is a modern version of a crate that has cameras for thermal, RGB, and IR, and then it'll also have a scale. So that's mostly for health purposes, but it'll also help us determine behavioral traits. So are they itching themselves a lot in a particular area is both behavior and health. But when the doorbell rings, are they, very attentive, and are they rushing to the door, or are they more calm? When somebody new comes over, do they get anxious, or are they more excited and want to play? So those are the types of things we can understand better for communication and for betterment of their well-being. But also like tail wagging and other expressive physical traits like we were talking about become a lot easier to see with a high resolution, high frame rate camera that we can put on the den itself.
I didn't know that you guys are building a den, but
it's very new.
Is that for like the home, or is that for like kennels, or is that for like clinics? Like what are you envisioning?
It'll be mostly for the home, and then we'll be creating a separate version for kennels and vets. Mostly so that a lot of when you go to the vet, it's a lot of basic stuff. So what's their weight? How are they feeling? What has been the behavior like? Are there any things that are coming up? And I mean, vets do their best to get a better sense, but if you're not taking diligent logs, or you're not very attentive, not because you're not trying to be, it's just you're busy, you're doing stuff, that you kind of get this imbalance in care for the dog. And it's because a lot of the times right now I have two dogs behind me, but I'm not actively looking at them. I'm looking at you. And so, if I don't hear her licking her paw, I won't know that. If she's kind of softly doing something, it's very hard to tell about these kinds of behaviors. And I do my best. I mean, I'm with them all day long. I'm there with 8 hours a day, and I still miss these key aspects, like until it becomes very obvious. Like until last week, she went from licking her paw to limping to basically not moving at all. It took a while to realize there's something embedded in her paw that we need to look at.
So that maybe the crate device you're creating, the den you call it, it's going to give you way more indicators, because she may have those movements. You'll have those cameras around. You'll see odd behaviors that you won't normally see. And everybody talks about AI, and I wanted to get to that topic. I'm assuming you're using a lot of AI to get a lot of these insights. Is this assumption right?
Yeah. So with the kind of work we do, there's opportunities for both classical models and for transformer models. And so a lot of the generative AI stuff is all coming from the transformer world. And now there's new kind of models that people are trying to do with symbolic stuff, but it's very, very early. But what we do with classical models is a lot of pre-processing the audio streams. So can we identify the dog bark comes from a transformer model? Can we isolate it? It comes from a more classical model. Isolating is also a transformer model, but indicating what is like the frequency, the range, like that comes from classical stuff. Turning them to a Mel spectrogram is much more a classical approach. Being able to cluster it is a very classical approach to ML. But then being able to then process it to create, okay, these are the set of words that we care about. These are the kinds of health indicators we care about. Something like, okay, is this a cough something like closer to a kennel cough, or is it a one-off cough? Is it a cough because they drank a lot of water very quickly? That we started with a classical model and are moving to transformer stuff. And we found that when you don't have a lot of data, it works really well to create some of these very specific deterministic classical systems, and we can iterate on them very quickly. As we get more and more data, as we get better in predictions, and then the transformer models give us a much better understanding of like identifying key features that we don't have to like hard code. And when you're talking about creating a more universal system, it becomes very hard when you have to create these very small models all over the place. So it helps us kind of consolidate that stuff. So it's been a lot of learning of how to really take something from, because a lot of times you go, oh, these models are really cool, but then when you productionize them, it just doesn't work as well. Or if you're trying to debug them or trying to figure out what's going on. So having these classical models in the back end up allowing us to get a better sense of what's going on with the data. Can we fine tune things ourselves manually? Tweak the parameters and then use a much bigger model once we have much more confidence in that system.
Got it. And AI is very, very new, so I'm sure that there's a lot of hallucinations and there's a lot of stuff that may not be helping. So maybe you're capturing data just from movements over time, and there might be a lot of interesting ways that you can play with it to figure out what's going to help communication.
Yeah. Yeah. Precisely. And the way that these models interact with each other, what we found, okay, so for example, right now when you have a coding model and you wanted to do math, I mean, it's cool, but you should just pass that to a calculator, right? You don't need a very robust model doing 1 + 1 or a square root. And in many cases, what's happening is you have the LLM write software that's already built in your computer to do the task that you could have just called a tool for. And so those are the types of ways that we use our systems. There's these classical things like a calculator, well tried and true, we can count on it. We call that tool from our model, so that way we're very robust. And then as we get more data, then we can turn that into a transformer model, build more and more confidence in it, and then swap it. And we're right now getting to the point of swapping in these transformer models because we're building more confidence. But it took time. It took a lot of years of just playing around with the stuff, getting data coming in, trying out things with different people. And even if you change the device slightly, the way that the data comes in through that microphone or the IMU alters the way that the model works too. So having something that was very quick and easy to iterate on was very important, because these transformer models could take days or weeks or months to train, if depending on how many parameters and how robust and how many features you care about.
And you're doing a lot. You're using AI too. You're building hardware. Dogs involved in this, so it's a really, I'd call it noble long-term type of products that can really help humanity. But I think there's a lot of moving parts in it where it's not a simple texting app or or anything like that. You have a lot of different parts that you're trying to analyze. Building a startup like that is challenging. First of all, why this? Let's go into that a little bit. It's kind of a crazy idea. It's one of those out there ideas where the more you talk about it, the more I see it, and I'm I get it. It's just there's a lot involved. There's a lot of moving parts. What made you go towards this as an entrepreneur doing it as long as you have? There's a lot of questions in there, but
I mean, to be completely honest, I wanted this. So my background's in B2B logistics, supply chain, very mathematically heavy, obvious. You kind of go to people we could do it faster, better, cheaper, and you win that contract. Most likely. I mean, there's nuances there, but what ended up happening is we started this in the pandemic mostly as a test, a challenge to myself. Okay, it's a pandemic. It's the first time I didn't have a company. I didn't have rent because I was at home with my parents. I didn't have a contract. I had nothing to really do. And there was just a lot of like stuff on that was going on that I was like, okay, I can't really do anything about it. And in the back of my head in 2019, this TED talk from Dr. Denise Hertzing came to mind, where she's trying to talk to dolphins. And I created a small meetup group in LA. And so I was like, okay, let's just try this out. And so during the pandemic, I got very interested. And then I met one of the YC alums were having a talk about GPT 2 or 3 at that time. It was like very new. It wasn't even Chat GPT. And we were talking, and one of the people there, who now is an advisor, got very excited when I told him, like, yeah, like, can you use this for like dolphin communication? Because we've been trying and it doesn't work. And he really pushed me. Like, he literally emailed me like every week to be like, hey, are you doing this company? And I was like, I don't know, man. It's not a company. And then one day we got on a call with him, and I was like, how do you turn this into a company? And through that like conversation, we had some like really clear milestones, but it still wasn't super clear. So I was talking to Abby, my wife, now wife, but at the time we were dating, and she was like, this is really exciting stuff, but like, and Kai was barking, like, can you just tell me what Kai is saying? Like, she was very practical, but it was kind of a joke. And in that time, everything clicked. Like, it's one of those things like, you don't have like usually these movie moments don't happen, but like I was thinking about it since 2019. I was talking to a friend of mine. He became an advisor, and we had these dogs, and it was like, okay, if we could do with dogs, then it can scale out. And then at that point, I read everything I could about dogs. I read every research paper, I read every book, I read every behavioral study, and it was very easy because again, during the pandemic, there wasn't very many things requiring your attention. And so, between the pandemic, I moved from my house in Jersey to SF, and then through the process started dating Abby, and that became highly productive. And then as I went to friends, they thought it was a joke at first, and they're like, if you make this happen, we're going to be so rich. So they gave me some money, and then that gave me some forward direction. And then, I ended up meeting some other investors, and they had some very interesting views on how this was going to happen. I mean, I've heard everything from giving dogs crypto wallets to giving dogs like brain extensions. Like, once you go down the realm of like, hey, this sci-fi thing is now possible, then you attract that kind of outlier attention, and you start to get people that are even further from where you are to give you input. And that just created this very like interesting snowball effect. Now, I will be completely honest. There are times where I'm like, this is super crazy. This is even possible. And like when you're talking to people and they don't quite believe you, and there's this whole view of like, oh, this would be nice, but I don't think I could, buy your product because it's too insane. Then you can start to like doubt yourself. And you go, maybe I should do something else. But then like something always pulls me back. Like as soon as I go, hey, this is over, I will get funding, or I will get somebody to be like, hey, what you told me changed my life. And it's like very small things, but you don't expect these like kind of like effects. And even like, I know we're talking about there are companies that are like doing texting or quote unquote simpler things, but they are the reasons why we can do all this stuff, right? Like we started our service with a texting service and we got data, then we turned it into an app, and then we turned it into Swift app, and then and then we got devices. So it was very iterative, but it took like a lot of these other startups that were solving some of these more like needs that we had that we didn't have to solve for. And now what I've been encouraging more and more entrepreneurs to do is that, look, you have models to help you write code. You have models to help you think through these like very complex scientific systems. You have models that can do things that required whole teams of people before. So the further you push yourself, the more you get out of these models. Now, there are these weird edge cases with these models where if you try to do something sci-fi, the models will actually discourage you and say, hey, this is not possible. So you have to really work with it. But then you realize like that's your opportunity, because nobody else has the data, that nobody else in the world has input this information to the data set. So now you can learn and expand human knowledge. That's like really what drives me for a lot of the companies I've done. And historically I've started with companies that were very ambitious, and then I went to something that was much more pragmatic. And I found that it always ended up being a mistake because you just become like everybody else. And but that's been for me. I found friends of mine who've taken something very straightforward and pragmatic and turned it into very large, ambitious companies. So approaching it from both angles works. I like being in the Bay Area because every day you're blown away by how quickly someone can do something, how young someone can do it, how like just there's so many outliers here. How someone's taken something like very straightforward and turned it into a way to change the way the world works. Like connecting with one another and sharing pictures has transformed our entire political system. The way that we do accounting will change the way companies are built. So a lot of these things are very novel. I mean, they seem pragmatic, but become very novel. Like when you have companies run exclusively by agents, how do you build that? Or how is this like now we don't have to hire three additional people, but because our ambitions are growing, we have to actually hire other groups of people. So, historically we would have had to hire like six engineers or whatever, but now we have to hire people who understand these agents and how to like transform them and how to work with the technical debt they create because they produce so much code so quickly. So yeah, there's just different sets of challenges that we've had to experience with the way that we've built this company.
Are you technical, or were you not technical before starting this company?
Yeah, hyper technical. In terms of like, I wrote the first set of code. I hired all the engineers and then I worked with them on the models. But then we got to a point now where the person writing the models is like 10x better than me, and there's no way I'm gonna like get to his understanding unless I do that work. The person that's now doing our product is just much better than me, and she's been incredibly like when you see the output of the people that work with you and you go, well, I would this would have been great if I worked for them. Like you're like, okay, this is phenomenal work. And slowly I've realized, look, like my job isn't to figure out how to build the thing. It's to figure out who knows how to build the thing and put them in a team that they can be productive on. And that's always been the journey, but you sometimes forget because in the beginning it's so much fun to write the code or so much fun to work on the product. And it's a lot more, it's scarier to like sell it to people because you're like, what are they going to think? And then you get to the point of like, well, I actually love selling this thing. And I would like other people to like manage some of the more technical complexities here.
And okay, so you built the first version of it, and you moved to the Bay. Like it sounds like you've been around. You've been to the West Coast, the East Coast. You were in LA, and then it sounds like you're in the Bay Area now, or in San Francisco. Like, what are the pros and cons of being in those different areas? Like, I do feel like the Bay is a bubble. It's a very tech focused, forward like culture here. But like you took this journey also to get here. Like, would you have taken this journey like if you weren't not here? And what I mean by that is like I sat down one time with the creator of Nest, and he's like, I had to leave the Bay. I had to leave San Francisco to like see what Nest could be. He realized I needed a remote thermostat because I'm traveling. As silly as it sounds, and that was like his like aha moment. It sounds like your aha moment was in the Bay Area. Was it outside the Bay Area, or was it like just a sequence of like maybe talk about like that a little bit?
So what I'll say is all these cities have a lot of benefits, but for me personally, being in the Bay, you're around. So okay, to put this in context, I heard some stat where it was like the Bay Area has the most number of cults but for anywhere else in the United States. It's a good context because it allows you to
Did you say
recognize
cults?
that.
You said cults? Or
Yeah,
what did
cults. Like the
cults?
most number of cults and then the most number of like religious type of like adaptations. And so it's important to realize that people here are very willing to believe something. So you tell them stuff. It also increases their gullibility, but there's a separate train of thought there. But they're very willing to believe. So, for example, this weekend I was at this like biohacker convention to do a talk on what we're talking about with dog communication. And right after my talk, there's a person who's like, we're going to genetically modify dogs to have increased cognitive ability and change their tongue shape to see if they can communicate with us. We're going to work with talk to them and see if there's more practical ways of approaching that. But then there's people who are like growing organs in their home, and there's people who are creating new models for protein development, and those are the kinds of things that it's you see some people are coming from Germany, people are coming from LA, they're coming from Austin. But what happens is the convergence of that all here and people willing to believe and going, okay, and then what can you do there? It's very different when you have to convince people that the idea is even valid. And then once they get them accepting that, then you can build on it. Here, it's kind of the opposite. People accept it and build. What that puts you in a weird trap, because if everything's accepted, then like when do you get like the critical feedback? And you have to kind of explicitly ask people to be critical. Now, the other thing is that consumer companies in the Bay Area have a very different trajectory. A lot of the ways that people are kind of informed to build a consumer company mirrors like the world of the past, right? You build up something like Facebook and you kind of dominate the market and you are the number one player, and you're kind of a monopoly kind of operator. Then there's the opportunities like you see in New York or even LA, where consumer companies create a brand of desirability. They create an understanding of how do you create something that attracts people to you. And you're not just doing something to dominate the space. You're trying to do something that allows you to enter the market in a distinctive way and attract a certain group of people. You build with that kind of inner working. And so the kind of products you see in New York and LA, they think about design a lot. They think about brand a lot. They think about these kinds of like ways to develop stuff that's different than the Bay Area. But you do have the challenges. Like when I was doing a talk in New York, I was talking about providing personhood for dogs. And I didn't realize, because I was basically been trying this out in San Francisco so often, that I'd introduced like 10 foreign concepts to the audience, right? I introduced things about agentic companies and about crypto and like about dogs and personhood and like communication. And the thing is, in the Bay Area, it's so like steeped in all of these technologies, and you're kind of always thinking about what's next, that a lot of what you take for granted, even in like other major cities like New York City, it's still like very new to people. Like, okay, what do you mean that you're just gonna like eliminate people from a company? What do you mean that like you're gonna like create a DAO? And like, what is why does it need to be decentralized? Like, what is a point? And these are like very technical people in New York. And it's like, and it's when you think about it, and you get these kinds of conversations, like people from New York come to the Bay Area and they're like, do you guys talk about anything else besides tech and startups? And you go to New York and you go, well, do you guys talk about anything else besides your lives and what's going on and the weather? And so that's kind of why I chose the Bay Area. It's like you're constantly in this like view of like what's the horizon. And that's why I think that like there's so many interesting kind of people here, and there's very interesting people in New York and LA, but they're in domains that I don't understand as well. They're in like entertainment, or they're in design or art, and they do very fascinating work. It's very hard for me to appreciate it because I'm much more of a technical startup type of person. So I came here in 2015 for YC, then I stayed here, and then I kind of did most of my 20s in the Bay Area. So my learning and thinking kind of emerged from this world.
Is this the company that is in YC? Like this company, or was it? Okay. So you did YC, that company. Maybe you could talk about that journey a little bit, like how you did that before you started this company.
So in college, in my first company, and I worked with a childhood friend of mine, and that was one of the best experiences I've ever had. We were in a market to taxi industry, which was you can hear the stories of Uber and stuff. I mean, there's only a few ways to compete, and you have to be cutthroat. Like, you will lose if you don't. And we weren't cutthroat, and we still got a lot of the market share, but it was a very challenging business. I mean, we had everything from our competitors hiring escorts to take away our contracts, all the way to defrauding people based on saying, hey, this is a bill you have to sign, when it was really a contract that they had to sign, to all kinds of crazy, chaotic things. And I mean, it wasn't an embellishment to say that like there was a few different mafia groups that were part of the cab industry at the time. They've now left, but they were very deeply involved in a lot of the operational developments. And so, yeah, you had a lot of like competing aspects there, but it was the most exciting part of my time. Like I was doing school and I was working on this company and we are building something and we got the second most number of cabs signed up to us. And we were very hungry. We wanted to make it work. And we did all of that in like 9 months, and then we sold it to our nearest competitor because during the time we were fundraising in Boston, we were going through the financial crisis of 2008, and we went to an investor who literally said, "Hey, every week my net worth declines. I don't know if I could invest in your company." So we decided, okay, we have to figure out something here, and the city was breathing down our necks, saying like, if you're not capitalized by some date, or you don't start rolling this out by this date, then you'll be penalized financially. It turned out that they were bluffing and the real date was like June and we would have been able to fundraise, but we didn't want to take a chance. We were 19, 20, 21 maybe. And yeah, we just couldn't figure out how to like negotiate with that city. Later it turned out that the taxi commissioner got arrested for bribery and fraud, and from the time period that we're talking about. But he got arrested in like 2018, 2019 timeframe. So that was our whole backdrop. But I was so excited and obsessed with this kind of world that I knew I had to do it again. So I found another college friend of mine. We started a company in the warehousing industry. We started out with self-driving cars, and then we started building the company for warehousing to do some type of autonomous vehicles there. And then it kind of evolved and morphed into this like API that anybody could get warehousing for. We got into YC, thankfully, because Justin Kahn was really interested in what we were doing. And then that changed the trajectory of our lives, really. Now, that company, as alluded to before, we took something ambitious like self-driving cars and we tried to reduce it down to something more pragmatic. And it was just not the right fit. It was very hard to, there's a lot of competition. You were trying to like figure out how to like really address the market, try to be distinctive, try to hire for it. And when you do something more pragmatic, the people you attract end up being more practical people. And it's what you want. You want to build a company that works. And when you start talking about things that are just like a little bit outside, you start to lose your own credibility in your own company. And that happens when you grow very quickly and you created a certain culture initially, a pragmatic viewpoint, and then you try to do something very different later on. And then I was also very young, so managing people and understanding that stuff. We had co-founder disagreements that led to a co-founder breakup. We had investor disagreements. Like at that point, I was just like some 20-year-old kid trying to like, it was like me against the world, and very quickly realized the world is very big. And so we ended up merging that with another company in my batch. It's still operational, it's still doing well, but it just realized it wasn't the company I wanted to build. And then I went to LA to help do a turnaround effect. There was a company with 6 weeks from bankruptcy. I helped them raise their equity round, helped them raise their debt round, helped them build out their tech team, and even wrote the first lines of code to transition them from a logistics company to a fintech company. But again, it was like I was just realizing more and more that I'm very interested in deep tech. Like I want to do something that requires a true change in the way that scientific progress works. And so during that, I found this TED Talk, and then I started building a group of people to do this stuff, work with. But going back to this point, it's like in LA, we attracted a lot of people who wanted to be part of this, but there wasn't that level of building that you see in SF. Like SF, people are ready to just pull out their computers and start writing code and doing stuff. There, we had like a group of 90 people that really 3 people wanted to build stuff. And then those 3 people, we got a lot done, but then I moved out of LA. And so it hurt a lot of the progress. But coming to the Bay Area, like we found people fairly quickly who were like, okay, cool. Like if you want this, I can help you here. Or I've worked with this person and it's worked well. And the level and capacity of company building is just different here. Like very simple things like 2 days ago, I went to go see a person. He's doing something very distinct. He's like trying to grow. I mean, he is growing organs in his house, and he's successful at it. And he was very pragmatic. He's like, I found people on Upwork, and he's like, this is how I did it, and this is how I got there. And so it's like, these are the kinds of things that you find very quickly here. Whereas in New York, I found things like industrial designers, product people, and brand people very fast. So I would say like working in these different cities and operating with these different people, you learn so much because everyone in these kinds of circles is always growing, learning, building, doing something. And when you have something that's like out there, you attract these people who are also out there, and what you find about a lot of people who are in the out there spaces, they're very resourceful because you don't get a lot of capital to do these things, and they're very willing to experiment because that's the only way to make these things work. Otherwise, you'll keep banging your head against this structural path and not get there. So
For this company, it seems like you have big vision. It's like, is this specifically just for dogs? Or is it going to go beyond dogs, or you're just taking it day by day? I guess like that's one question, and the other question is like just more broad for, I'd say, for entrepreneurs. What one piece of advice would you give them? So two-part question.
So I'll take the second question first. So the reason Abby is a co-founder, she's not only somebody that I've married to. It actually took me longer to convince her to be part of this company than it took me to convince her to marry me. So that's how much time it took. So Abby is very pragmatic, very practical, and very driven by numbers. And I'm very like out there storyteller, like, fundraiser, like building teams, that kind of stuff. And that kind of balance is really necessary to get things done. Otherwise, when it was just me, I was like kind of out there working on stuff, building new features, doing stuff, and we just never got out there. In the last, couple of months, we've just put like a very real number to stuff. And it's like, hey, look, like we have this much money, this much burn, like this is what we need to do. We need to get these milestones that we need to hit there. And it changes the dynamic of the company because you could get into a world where, look, like Walt Disney is an incredible entrepreneur, but he needed the people around him, or Steve Jobs, like he needed a Tim Cook to make these things real. So to balance these kinds of things, like if you're very like out there and you want to do these really cool things, then find somebody who can make that thing real. Otherwise, you'll just get into weird circles and spirals, and you may not make the kind of progress you're thinking about. You might attract a lot of people, but they'll get dismayed when you're not making real progress. And it's very easy to like spin yourself in circles because you're like, okay, this is something I can do, and then this I can do, and you just you bounce around walls. So getting someone structured was a huge enabler for us. And that was something I underestimated in my second company when I was doing it. My first company, it just happened that me and my co-founder were very complementary. But in terms of like where we want to take the company, I mean, yeah, like I want to go with dogs, and then I want to do cats and horses, and then dolphins, and then we want to like buy out SeaWorld and then create sanctuaries in the ocean to then create a new like way to communicate with wild orcas and dolphins. But that's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and we're going to need a lot of capital to do that stuff. And so my thinking is that we need to build a very successful brand in the companion pet space. Then we could do something within the horse world, which balances between companion and ranches. And then, we can iteratively do more stuff, right? But the big thing is establishing a beachhead, getting the first product out there, being very deliberate about how we approach this market, and then and selling incredibly well. I mean, having somebody on my team that has an understanding of product, and my co-founder being a very strong growth person and understanding the numbers, it allows us to like be more practical. Like it was through this kind of analysis I realized actually the top 25% of the market accounts for 75% of the spend. So it makes no sense to try to create a mass market product and a mass market pricing. It's better to create a premium pricing because then you get disproportionate margins to do more R&D with. And now it's not income correlated. You'll find people who make under 100K that spend like 20-30% of their pre-tax income on their dogs, and so, or cats, or whatever animal that they have at their home. And so I have 2 dogs, and then we got 2 cats, and as we keep expanding, maybe I get a horse or something, but you have to convince Abby about that. But the thing that I've really recognized is always fun and sexy to see the people like envisioning the future, and it's awesome. But when you look at the details, whether it's Elon Musk or whether it's Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or even like people that are famous and maybe not as controversial, you find that they're always backed up by people who know how to get things done and are structured. And they are very forceful with the way that they get things through. Because, you have Gwen Shotwell at SpaceX, and that's maintained stability for the entire company. And without her, it's very unlikely that this would have been a hyper success as it's been. At Tesla, he's kind of rotated through people, and you can see how that's kind of operated. You get into this cult of personality and you burn people out very fast. So what I would say is like finding someone who's very structured and oriented in that way, if you're a big kind of like thinker, helps a lot. And on the other side, I would say if you're like, hey, I'm very, I kind of like keep myself grounded and I try to do things one step at a time. Well, what ends up happening in those cases is you actually get to a point where you get bigger than you thought you were, and then you can do more stuff. And I've heard from people who are close to Mark Zuckerberg that he's actually a very practical, pragmatic guy. It's just that he gets people who give him ideas that he can implement because he has scale. I was going to just do a shout out to you because watching your story, because you were much earlier in YC than I was incredibly inspiring because you took on a very kind of thorny industry with your first company and had to go through lots of iterations to make that work. And then it finally, you kind of made it happen. And so these kinds of like stories allow people, when I was younger and even now, to go back and go like, there's like a true power to just perseverance and iteratively building something every single day, even in spaces you would think are impossible to crack into, especially in the era you were building your company in. I know the name Dr. Kronos, but I think you rebranded it since then. And so it was, it should have been incredible. And so I'm curious to see how you apply the same types of dynamics to Just Paid, because it just seems like there's something else here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said one word there that's really true. It's persistence. And I think that's where a lot of success comes from. And I've heard it from a lot of founders. It's just being persistent. It's like, it's as silly as it sounds, it's like that persistence like breaks through walls over time. But it's a psychological game in a lot of ways. Like, can you get through these points? Like, Tesla was on the brink. You brought up Tesla a lot. It was on the brink of bankruptcy quite a bit, which is crazy. Like, they didn't have a lot of money. And, I think you kind of have to navigate those moments where you're truly stressed out and truly like on the brink of giving up. Like, there's videos of Elon Musk crying because he was so like broken, honestly. And he just was like, I don't know how to get through this, but somehow they pulled through in like really rough times. And I'm like, that's what makes companies like strong. And a lot of people give up. Like, I emailed the founder a couple of days ago and they're walking away from their startup. And I'm like, if they stick around, what could have happened? Like, what could have happened? But it's okay to leave also. It's not bad. It's just the persistence gives you more clarity about like, if you do it another 5 years, what could it be?
I know we're over, but there's one point I want to make here. So my YC company, this is the exact situation. So if we had just we just continued on our progress for just, I think 9 months, the entire company would have been able to be sold for a massive profit. Now, 9 months is a long time when you're inside of a company and you're really like struggling and trying to figure it out. But we stopped our company in 2018. By early 2019, logistics became a hot topic, and in 2020, it was what anyone was looking for. And so, it's just one of those things, like, just keep going and you keep persisting. You will end up in a world that may be fundamentally different than you started off in, and it may be a benefit to you. It could also be a negative. I've met founders where the pandemic destroyed their business and improved their competitors, but the point is you keep trying things out, things that you adapt and the world changes as well.
No, this is really, really great insight. And thank you for being on the podcast. I actually learned a lot. And one thing I really appreciate about your startup is the vision is really big. And, there's like investors like Founders Fund who talk about find a moat where there's nobody. And that's like an area that like is so open. And I think you're doing that with your startup. And I'm like, it's bigger than you realize if you can like get it there, because there's nobody working on this. I talked to literally hundreds of startups and I'm like, you're in a unique area where there's very few I'd say entrepreneurs thinking about. And it's also a fun area. It's like a do good area where like I think everybody wants to communicate better with everybody and everything on the planet. So it's like it's a really great, noble startup too. So I'm excited to see where like you take it, and I'm excited to see like what you guys do. And I think it could be big if if you could pull it off. Honestly, like awesome. Well, with that, we'll end the podcast. And no, this was great. I thank you for being on.